Greater New Orleans on LAE, presented by the National World War II Museum. Now featuring the special exhibition, Reel to Reel, Hollywood and World War II. NationalWW2Museum.org. And by the Historic New Orleans Collection. Now showing Surrounded by Water, New Orleans, the Mississippi River, and Lake Pontchartrain. HNOC.org.
Hello everyone, I'm Tom Bagwell and welcome to A Greater New Orleans on LAE, television worth watching. Still to come on this program, Peter Finney Jr., the editor of the Clarion Herald, with his weekly visit. But we begin with a woodworker. To some, one man's trash is another man's treasure, or in this case, one man's passion. Tonight our guest will discuss the benefits of recycling wood. He'll also show us some of his work and a surprise ending. And is woodworking art? We'll ask him that question. Our guest is wood recycler Thomas Dutel. Great to have you with us on the program. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Tom.
When did you start woodworking, and how did you get interested in wood recycling?
Well, actually, I started when I was a child growing up. My next door neighbor was a salesman for Rockwell Delta Tool Company. I would hop the fence, listen to the saws, and just had a fascination for it.
That was the woodworking part. How about the wood recycling part?
That started about this time last year. I was doing a home through the Operation Helping Hands of the Archdiocese, and we were repairing some of the floor joists. We took away the damaged wood, cut it in half, and I saw what I thought that I think it was. Put it in the back of my truck, brought it home, ran it through the planer, and sure enough, it was heart pine.
Now, why was that significant for you to find this kind of wood? Educate us for us, if you would.
Well, heart pine comes from the heart of the longleaf pine tree. Those particular trees are not grown anymore. Many people have heart pine floors, if you will. The plantation floors, a plank floor.
And the age of this tree, you actually brought one of these items that you were talking about.
Yes,
and you
I
were
did.
giving our staff a little history lesson. If you would, feel free to pick that up. Show us what you showed us.
Well, this is part of the foundation system on many of the raised homes in New Orleans that were built around the turn of the century. This piece in particular would sit on the concrete pillar or the brick pillar. It's called a sill, and it runs the perimeter of the home. This particular piece of lumber was somewhat torn up by some insects. And
Probably termites.
yes.
Right.
And the way that I noticed it, if you will, was the grain that's on here. This grain, these growth rings, or the grain, if you will, runs this way around a very large tree. And what's significant about that is that this grain is very tight. Hard pine was characteristically known back in the day for its longevity.
This particular piece you were sharing that based on the rings would be about how old, and then based upon where it was, this tree would have lived when in this area, if in fact came from this area.
I believe that it did come from this area. You know, across the lake was at one time a very large forestry industry. My guess is that this pine tree was probably 100 years old when it was cut down and put into commerce. The home that it was built on, maybe around 1900, something like that. So this piece of wood, in my estimate, is probably about 200 years old.
Wow, that's amazing. Now, where do you find most of your materials in the area when you work in wood recycling today?
When FEMA quit picking up, everyone who was repairing termite damage or there was a little moisture damage to their lumber would put it on the curb. and I called it scrounging. I just drive down the street, had a trailer, put it in the back of the trailer, bring it back to the shop, take all the nails out, run it through the planer. This piece is a good example. This would be a piece of this, and if you'll notice, you see how clear that board is? It doesn't have one knot in it. And here again, notice the grains that are in there. And on this particular piece, these are the nail marks. This is where the floor planks were in the house. So we take all the nails out, we run it through, and we make it nice and square. We try to get it down to a particular thickness for a particular need, as in the bench. This bench uses 2x4s, 1x4s, and 1x2s. I have a little tool that I use.
Sure, show us how it works.
In order to show. This is called a caliper. I learned about a caliper in the agricultural industry. A caliper is used to measure the diameter of a tree. In this case, since we're working with lumber, we're going to measure the thickness of the lumber. And on this particular one, we would take our caliper. You notice that it's gauged. And we would come up with our thickness like that. The planer takes, and it has 4 knives. It just barely peels off a little bit of a flake at a time. Maybe a 64th to a 32nd of an inch at a time. So it's kind of easy for us to get down to an exact measure of 1.5 by 3.5, or a 2x4, if you will.
And a 2x4 really isn't truly a 2x4.
No, it isn't.
Close to a 2x4, but not a 2x4.
Correct.
When you hear people today say things, boy, the wood today just isn't what it used to be. Is that in fact, and you're someone who's dealt with the wood of yesteryear compared to what you can find today, is that true? And if that is the case, why is that?
Well, the lumber that we have today, it is genetically grown. The seed has been adjusted through science and through technology. This was something that Mother Nature gave us. This is a slow growth tree. The trees that we have today, they grow very rapidly. Slow growth, I like to think of this as like mama's pot roast.
Slow, steady, delicious at the end.
Yes.
You're sitting on one of your pieces of work, a beautiful bench, which you've just showed us. Talk to me about some of the other things. Is there a specialty area that you like, in which you like to work?
Well, the specialty area would be carpentry. A lot of guys can cut. A lot of guys can build things. The important thing that I find, a very basic, very fundamental building block, is making the pieces fit. Not everybody can build a box. That's where the second tool comes into play. And this is a square. It's important that each piece of wood be cut almost precisely. The tools that I have to make that work help, can't make it perfect, but can help.
Yesterday we had, last night we had the director of the Ogden Museum of Southern Art. Do you consider working with wood an art form?
To a certain degree. I find that it has always been one of my passions in life.
And where do you think that passion comes from? You mentioned listening to the sounds of the saw. Was there any other event or any person in your life who perhaps lent this passion?
There was a gentleman by the name of Jay Hotard. Jay was very instrumental. He was a very big builder back in the 60s and 70s in New Orleans. Jay built the Plaza Towers. Jay built Hines Elementary School. He also built the overpass on Elysian Fields. However, Jay's claim to fame was French Quarter restoration. He could take a piece of wood and make it fit better than any other person I know. As a matter of fact, he did the restoration on one of the Neville's homes uptown.
Wow.
Yeah.
So this is a living for you, not a hobby?
Correct.
Okay. Tell me, I know that recently you've done some work with Catholic Charities. So it's a business, but you also feel a need to give back in some ways.
That's correct.
Tell me about that work.
Well, I've worked with Catholic Charities, Mercy Corps. The components to this bench actually came through a Mercy Corps effort. These were the roof rafters to a home that was deconstructed on Perdido Street, up around the medical district. I've worked with the Green Project in their Salvation's 2008 art project held back in March. This particular bench, I made a replica of it and donated it to their project. It brought in $500, I believe, for their effort. I thought that was kind of nice. And there is another organization that we're helping called the Preservation Resource Center.
A lot of guys think they could do this, and it looks like a lot of fun. Give some advice to men out there who can't wait to go out and buy that, jigsaw, circular saw, and say, "Boy, I want to get into that."
That's a tough question, because I put an ad in the paper. I asked for master carpenters. I went through probably about a dozen people, nothing personal, but I gave them each a bench to build. I would say 11 and a half of them all wanted to pull out the putty can and start puttying in all the joints. That's not the way it fits. It's got to fit square.
Do you worry that the master woodworkers who did consider it a craft and an art are going by the wayside? I almost hear some of that in your voice.
Oh, in New Orleans, I do believe so, yes. You can see some of the structures that are built in the French Quarter along Bayou St. John, and to replicate them with some of today's modern conventional housing, it's difficult to accept.
And you would do what kind of, as we wrap things up, you would do what kind of work on a day-to-day basis? You make your living with wood, but doing what kind of furniture, those types of things?
Well, our forte is